I'm Naomi Carter. I'm 34 years old, and the moment I realized my mother had erased everything I'd done for this family, she was smiling into a microphone with a champagne glass in her hand. My husband and I had just arrived at the wedding reception with a card tucked inside his jacket and a generous gift we had spent weeks planning. I was still fixing my lipstick in my mind, still telling myself to relax and enjoy the night, when my mother stood up to give her toast. She looked proud, glowing even, the kind of proud that makes a room go quiet before people start clapping. Then she announced that she and my father were giving their home to my younger sister as a wedding gift. Just like that, their home. The same home I had been helping keep afloat for 5 years. The same mortgage payment that had quietly left my account every month while everyone else kept calling me so dependable, like that was supposed to be enough. The room burst into applause. People laughed, cried, reached for tissues, called it beautiful. I sat there with a frozen smile on my face, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. What hurt even more was that my sister didn't look shocked. She looked touched, prepared, like this had all been decided long before that microphone ever reached my mother's hand. And somehow, that wasn't even the worst part. Because 2 months later, the same people who gave away the house I had been helping pay for decided they were entitled to something else that belonged to me too. Before I tell you what happened next, and why their smiles disappeared faster than they expected, tell me this. What time is it where you are right now? And where are you listening from? I really want to know how far this story reaches. The drive home felt longer than it should have. My husband Ethan kept one hand on the wheel and the other wrapped around mine, but I could barely feel it. I just stared through the windshield and replayed my mother's voice over and over in my head. We are giving our family home to our daughter and her new husband so they can begin their life with security and love. Security and love. I almost laughed when I thought about it, except I was too busy trying not to cry. By the time we pulled into our driveway in Charlotte, I finally broke. I sat in the parked car and sobbed so hard my chest hurt. Ethan didn't rush me. He just waited until I could breathe again. Then he asked the one question nobody else in that ballroom would have dared ask. Did they ever talk to you about it first? I wiped my face and shook my head. No, not once. Not even a hint. That was the part that kept cutting deeper the longer I thought about it. It was not just that they had given the house to my sister Sienna. It was that they had done it after 5 years of letting me carry that mortgage quietly, month after month, like my help was invisible because it was dependable. 5 years earlier, my father Howard had retired earlier than expected after some health issues, and my mother Pamela had started dealing with chronic pain that made steady work harder for her. They panicked when they realized they were falling behind. I still remember the day my mother cried at my kitchen table and said they were scared they might lose the house. I told them I would help. At first, I thought I was buying them time, just 6 months, maybe a year, until things stabilized. But 1 year became 2, then 3, then 5. Sometimes it was the mortgage, sometimes it was a plumbing repair, a property tax shortage, an insurance increase, a broken water heater, medication costs, groceries, or a car repair for my father because he needed to get to appointments. I covered what needed covering because I was their daughter, and because every time I almost said this has to stop, my mother would look at me like I was their anchor. The one they could count on. The one who never made things harder. I had spent years being proud of that. That night, it stopped feeling like love and started feeling like a role they had assigned me. Ethan leaned against the kitchen counter while I paced and talked myself into fury. The worst part is she knew, I said. Sienna knew. Did you see her face? She wasn't surprised. Ethan nodded slowly. I saw it. That was planned, Naomi. I hated hearing it out loud because it confirmed what my gut already knew. Sienna had always been the center of gravity in that family. The younger sister with the softer smile, the dramatic reactions, the endless ability to need something at exactly the right moment. If she had dance photos, the whole house turned into a shrine. If I got straight A's, everyone said that was just Naomi being Naomi. If she had a breakup, it became a family crisis. If I was overwhelmed, people told me I was strong enough to handle it. And I did. Over and over. I handled it so well that eventually nobody asked what it was costing me. I went upstairs that night and stood in front of the bathroom mirror, looking at my own face like I was meeting someone I had neglected. I was 34 years old, successful, married to a good man, owning my own place, owning a cabin by the lake that I had bought before I met Ethan because I wanted one space in my life that belonged only to me. And yet somehow one speech from my mother had reduced me to feeling 12 years old again, standing off to the side while everyone else clapped for Sienna. I told myself I was done crying, done waiting for gratitude, done hoping the next sacrifice would finally mean something. But deep down, I still had no idea how much worse they were about to make it. For the next several weeks, I tried to act like the wedding had not cracked something open inside me. I threw myself into work and buried my time in research reports, client interviews, and deadlines. At night, Ethan would ask if I wanted to talk. And sometimes I did. But most nights, I just wanted the noise in my head to stop. My parents texted like nothing had happened. My mother sent me a picture of leftover cake from the reception and wrote, "Wasn't it magical?" My father sent a thumbs-up emoji after Ethan mailed over the generous check we had already promised as part of the wedding gift. I stared at that one for a full minute before setting my phone face down on the table. Sienna sent honeymoon photos from Napa with captions about new beginnings and blessings. Not one of them mentioned the house. Not one of them asked how I felt. Not one of them said thank you for 5 years of quiet help that made this whole fairy tale possible. 2 months after the wedding, on a Thursday afternoon, my phone lit up while I was between meetings. It was my mother. I let it ring once, then twice, then answered because some old reflex still lived in me. Her voice came through cheerful and brisk, like she was calling to confirm lunch plans. "Naomi, honey, I just wanted to let you know your father and I are heading up to your lake place this weekend. We figured it would be easiest to get settled before the weather turns." I thought I had misheard her. I pulled the phone away from my ear and looked at the screen, then put it back. "Get settled. What are you talking about?" There was a tiny pause, the kind people use when they think you are being difficult on purpose. "Well, after giving the house to Sienna and Graham, obviously we need a new place, and your cabin is perfect. Quiet, manageable, close enough for weekend visits if you ever want to come." I actually laughed then, not because anything was funny, but because my body could not process the audacity fast enough. "Mom, no." There was silence on the line this time, but it was colder. "No." I repeated it more clearly. "You are not moving into my cabin. You never asked. It is not available." Her tone sharpened. "Naomi, do not be selfish. We are family. We cannot stay with newlyweds forever." I leaned back in my chair and felt something inside me turn from hurt into steel. "Then maybe you should have thought about that before giving away your house." She inhaled like I had slapped her. "Your father and I assumed you would understand. You have a husband, a good income, and more than enough space. We need that cabin more than you do." That sentence told me everything. Not just what she wanted, but how she had always seen me. Not as someone with her own life and boundaries, but as the family reserve fund, the backup plan with a pulse. I lowered my voice because anger works better when it is quiet. "Let me be very clear. You are not moving into my property. If you go up there this weekend, you will be trespassing." She went silent, then gave a small, bitter laugh. You are being dramatic. We will talk when you calm down. She hung up. I stared at my phone for 3 full seconds, then immediately called Ethan. By the time I got home, he already had a duffel bag packed and my laptop in the car. We drove toward Lake Lure that same evening with the sun sinking behind the highway and my pulse beating so hard in my throat it felt like a second heartbeat. Halfway there, Ethan asked the question I had been avoiding. Do you think they will actually go? I looked out the window and thought about the confident certainty in my mother's voice. Yes, I said. I do. And that is what scares me most. They do not think they are taking something from me. They think they already own the right to it. We pulled up to the cabin just after dark, and my stomach dropped before I had even unbuckled my seatbelt. My father's SUV was already in the gravel drive. The rear hatch was open. There were plastic bins on the porch, 2 suitcases by the front steps, and one of my mother's potted ferns sitting beside the door like they were planting a flag. The lights inside were on. Ethan muttered, "Unbelievable," under his breath. But I was already out of the car and halfway up the path. My mother opened the front door before I reached it. She was smiling, that same polished smile from the wedding, like she was hosting a lovely event and I was simply late. "There you are," she said. "I knew once you got here we could all talk like adults." I stopped on the porch and looked past her shoulder. My father was carrying in a box from the hallway. Sienna was in my kitchen, opening cabinet doors. Her husband Graham stood near the island with that useless look men wear when they know something is wrong, but are hoping to stay out of it. Nobody looked embarrassed. Nobody looked like they had crossed a line. They looked inconvenienced that I had interrupted their plan. I stepped inside and put my bag down without taking my eyes off any of them. "Who told you that you could come in here?" My father set the box down and sighed heavily, like I was making his evening harder than it needed to be. "Naomi, let us not turn this into a scene. Your mother already explained the situation." "No, she informed me of a decision you had no right to make." My mother folded her arms. "We used the key you gave us." "The emergency key," I said. "For emergencies, not for moving furniture into my house." Sienna finally turned toward me, her expression already slipping into that familiar mix of pity and irritation I had seen my whole life. "Why are you acting like this is some huge betrayal?" "Because it is." She scoffed. "Mom and Dad needed somewhere to go. You have a cabin you barely use." Ethan stepped closer to me but let me speak. That was one of the things I loved most about him. He knew when to protect me and when to trust me with my own voice. "I barely use it because I work," I said. "I also paid for it with my own money, which means I decide who stays here." My mother's smile thinned. "Naomi, after everything your father and I did for you growing up, I would think helping us now would not be such a burden." I stared at her. There it was. The old script. "We raised you, we fed you, we did our duty, and now your life belongs to us in installments." I took a slow breath. "I helped you for 5 years. I paid your mortgage. I covered repairs. I covered shortages. I did it because I loved you. And you repaid that by giving the house away without even warning me." Sienna slammed a cabinet shut. "You keep acting like you own their house." "I never said I owned it. I said I paid for it. There is a difference, and all of you know it." My father rubbed his face. "We cannot stay with Sienna and Graham. They are newly married. They need privacy." I laughed once, sharp and humorless. "So they get privacy in the house I kept from foreclosure, and you get my cabin, and somehow I am supposed to smile about it." My mother stepped closer, dropping the sweetness from her voice entirely. "Do not make this uglier than it has to be. We are here now. The simplest thing is for you to stop being stubborn and let this go." I looked around my own living room. My blankets had been moved. My books were stacked off the coffee table. Someone had set my framed photo from the mantel face down on a side chair so they could put one of my mother's candles there instead. That tiny thing almost broke me more than the bigger theft. They had not just entered my property. They had already started erasing me from it. I picked up the frame and turned it over. My hands were steady. You need to put everything back in your car and leave. Sienna crossed her arms. Wow. You really are that cold? I turned to her and saw it at last, clear as glass. She was not just spoiled. She was proud of being chosen. Proud that my sacrifices had financed the life she thought she deserved. Maybe I am cold, I said, but I am done being useful to people who mistake that for love. My mother's jaw tightened. If you are going to stand here and attack this family, then maybe you should leave and calm down. For a second, the entire room went silent. Even Graham looked shocked. That was the moment, the purest version of it. My mother, standing in my own cabin, telling me to leave because her comfort mattered more than my ownership, my history, or my humanity. Ethan touched my elbow. Naomi. I nodded once. I looked at each of them slowly, one by one, and memorized their faces. The entitlement, the certainty, the little smiles that said they still thought I would fold like I always had. Then I picked up my bag, walked out the front door, and went down the steps without another word. My mother called after me in a voice dripping with false patience. Good. Take a minute and come back when you are ready to be reasonable. I kept walking. By the time I reached the car, my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Ethan closed the passenger door behind me and asked what I wanted to do. I looked up at the cabin. At the warm light glowing through windows they had no right to stand behind, and took out my phone. They want me to leave, I said. Fine. But they are not staying. I called the non-emergency police line with my voice so calm that the dispatcher probably had no idea my whole body was shaking. I gave the address, explained that I was the property owner, and said family members had entered using an old emergency key after being explicitly told they did not have permission to move in. The dispatcher asked if they were threatening me. No, I said, just refusing to leave. She said an officer would be sent out. I ended the call and sat there with the phone in my lap. Ethan looked at me for a long moment and then nodded, like he knew there was no going back from this and that maybe there should not be. From the porch, I could see silhouettes moving through the cabin. My mother crossed the front room once, probably checking the window, and even from that distance I could see the confidence in the way she moved. She still thought I was bluffing. 15 minutes later, 2 sheriff's deputies turned into the driveway. The second the headlights swept across the porch, the front door opened. My mother stepped out first, still smiling, but it faltered when she saw me standing beside the patrol car speaking to the deputy. I handed over my ID, the deed copy on my phone, and the county tax records I had saved years ago in a cloud folder, because being a homeowner teaches you to keep everything. The deputy looked through it, asked a few questions, then walked with his partner toward the porch. My father came out behind my mother. Sienna and Graham hovered in the doorway. The deputies spoke with them for a couple of minutes while Ethan stood beside me with one hand on my back. I could not hear every word, but I caught enough. Do you own this property? No. Did the owner give you permission to reside here? Silence. Then my mother started talking, hands moving, voice rising and falling with that same practiced hurt she always used when she wanted to sound like the reasonable one. It did not work this time. One deputy turned toward me and motioned me over. Mom, he said, based on the documentation and your statement, they need to vacate tonight. If they return without permission, you may pursue trespassing charges. My mother stared at him in disbelief. This is absurd. I am her mother. He gave her the same flat professional look officers perfect after years on the job. And she is the owner. You still need to leave. That was when the smile died. Completely. Not faded. Not weakened. Died. My mother's face went pale with rage. My father looked like someone had slapped him awake. Sienna muttered, "Are you serious?" under her breath, but not loud enough for anyone to answer. Graham stared at the floor. I wish I could say I felt triumphant in some dramatic movie way, but what I felt was cleaner than that. Relief. A line being drawn in the only language they had finally been forced to respect. My mother turned to me then, eyes blazing. "You would humiliate us like this, in front of strangers." I held her gaze. "You humiliated yourselves when you tried to move into my home after I told you no." She opened her mouth, but the deputy cut in. "We need you to begin loading your belongings now." For the next 20 minutes, the family that had spent years assuming I would absorb every cost and every insult carried their bins and suitcases back down my porch in silence. My father would not look at me. My mother looked too often. Sienna cried once, angry tears, more offended than ashamed. Ethan did not say a word to any of them. He did not need to. The flashing lights painted the gravel in waves of red and blue, while my mother's fern went back into the SUV where it belonged. When they were finally packed, one deputy asked if I wanted a formal report number. I said yes. Then I asked if they would stay another 10 minutes while a locksmith came to change the front and back locks. My mother actually gasped when she heard that, as though the final insult was not their behavior, but my refusal to leave the door open for a repeat performance. The locksmith arrived fast because small towns are like that, efficient when everybody knows everybody. I stood on the porch while he worked, arms folded against the night air, and listened to the metallic click of old access being shut down for good. My parents drove away without another word. Sienna and Graham followed in a separate car. Once the driveway was empty, the cabin felt like mine again, but only barely. Inside, the air still felt disturbed, like a room after an argument. Ethan picked up my photo frame from the chair where I had left it and set it back on the mantel. I looked at it and nearly cried, not from sadness this time, but from the terrible clarity of what had just happened. My family had pushed as far as they thought they could, and for the first time in my life, I had pushed back harder. The backlash started before we even made it back to Charlotte. My phone buzzed with missed calls from my mother, then my father, then Sienna, then 3 cousins, an aunt, and a family friend from church who had not spoken to me in almost a year. I ignored them all. By the next morning, the story had gone public the way it always does in families like mine, twisted by the person most afraid of the truth. My mother had posted a long message on Facebook about how she and my father had been thrown out in their later years by a cold and ungrateful daughter who valued property over family. She wrote that I had called the police on my own parents and treated them like criminals. She left out the mortgage. She left out the wedding gift. She left out the warning, the refusal, the spare key, the moving bins, and the moment she stood in my house and told me to leave. The comments poured in exactly the way she wanted. "Praying for you." So heartbreaking. Children today are so selfish. How could she do this to her own parents? I sat at the kitchen table reading them while Ethan made coffee, and something inside me that had been trying to remain civilized finally snapped. Not into screaming, into clarity. I had spent my whole life being the one who stayed quiet because exposing family dysfunction felt ugly. But silence had only ever protected the people causing the damage. It had never protected me. Ethan set a mug beside me. "You do not owe anybody a performance," he said, "but you do owe yourself the truth." I opened my laptop. If my mother wanted an audience, then she was going to get the whole story. I wrote slowly at first, then faster. No insults, no dramatics, just facts. For 5 years, I had been paying the mortgage on my parents' house after they fell behind. Over those same years, I had covered multiple household emergencies and expenses when needed. At my sister's wedding, My parents publicly gifted that house to her and her husband without discussing it with me first, despite my long financial support. 2 months later, they attempted to move into my cabin using an old emergency key after I explicitly told them no. When they refused to leave, I involved law enforcement because it is my property. I attached screenshots of bank transfers going back years. I blurred account numbers but left dates, amounts, and memo lines visible. Mortgage, insurance shortage, roof repair, water heater, prescription help. I added one final paragraph that took me the longest to write because it was the truest. Loving your family does not mean surrendering your boundaries, your home, or your dignity. I helped because I believed I was supporting people who respected me. What happened instead was entitlement, secrecy, and manipulation. I will not apologize for refusing to be used. Then I hit post. The silence after that lasted less than a minute. First came private messages, then comments, then missed calls from people who suddenly wanted context. A cousin wrote, "I had no idea you were paying for their house." Another said, "Wait, they gifted away a house you were keeping afloat, and then tried to take your cabin too." One of my father's old friends commented that this was not the story he had been told. By noon, the moral certainty under my mother's original post had started to crack. By evening, it had split wide open. My mother deleted her post sometime that night, but it was too late. Screenshots travel faster than shame. 2 days later, my Aunt Linda called and said the thing nobody in my family had ever been willing to admit to my face. Your parents always expected more from you because you were the reliable one, and they excused more from Sienna because she was the fragile one. It was wrong then, and it is wrong now. Hearing someone say it felt like a window opening in a room I had spent years suffocating in, but the real blow did not come from Facebook. It came from reality. Once the drama settled enough for people to start asking practical questions, the shiny wedding gift stopped looking so magical. The house in Matthews still had property taxes, maintenance, insurance, and utilities. It needed upkeep. It had always needed upkeep. The only reason my parents had been able to maintain the illusion of stability was because I had been filling the gaps quietly. Now the gaps were back, and this time I was not standing in them. Sienna and Graham had not budgeted for that. They wanted the symbolism of a gifted home, not the actual cost of running one. A week later, I heard through my cousin that arguments had already started. Sienna said she thought Mom and Dad were going to help more. Mom said she thought I would calm down eventually and resume contributing because I always did. That was the moment it became almost darkly funny to me. Their entire long-term plan had depended on my obedience. Not my consent, my obedience. And once they no longer had it, the whole structure started collapsing under its own selfishness. The aftermath unfolded exactly the way greed usually does, slowly at first, then all at once. By the end of the month, Sienna and Graham were fighting over money. The house that had looked so generous in a wedding toast came with bills neither of them had truly planned for. Graham's commission income was inconsistent, Sienna's event work was seasonal, and my parents, now forced into temporary housing, were calling them constantly about help, storage costs, and what came next. The very people who had all smiled while I was being erased now had to sit in the mess they created without my money, my labor, or my silence holding it together. My parents ended up renting a small one-bedroom apartment on the edge of town near the airport. It was noisy, cramped, and nothing like the comfortable suburban home they had so proudly handed away. My mother went back to part-time work because she had no real choice. My father started driving for extra cash. Relatives who once rushed to comment under my mother's post suddenly had very little to say. Some apologized privately. A few never reached out again. Shame makes cowards out of people who love judging from a safe distance. Sienna lasted less than 6 months before the cracks in her dream life became impossible to hide. She and Graham listed the house quietly, without fanfare, after realizing the monthly costs were swallowing them alive. The irony was almost too clean. The house she had accepted like a crown became the burden that finally exposed how little she had ever intended to carry for anyone else. I heard from Linda that my mother cried when she learned they might sell, as if betrayal only counted when it happened to her. I wish I could tell you that hearing all of this made me feel vindicated in some dramatic, satisfying way, but the truth is more complicated. I felt lighter, safer, more honest. Not because my family was suffering, but because I was no longer organizing my life around preventing consequences for people who had never protected me from their own. That is a very different kind of peace. About 3 weeks after the house went on the market, my mother left me a voicemail. Her voice sounded smaller than I had ever heard it. "Naomi, we made mistakes. I know you are angry. I know you have every right to be. I just want a chance to talk." There was a pause and then, softer, "We never thought it would go this far." I listened to that line twice. We never thought it would go this far. That was the truth at the center of everything. They never thought I would stop it. They never thought I would let their choices belong to them. They never thought I would choose myself. I saved the voicemail, but I did not call back. Not because I wanted revenge anymore, because I finally understood that forgiveness without changed behavior is just another invitation to be hurt the same way again. Ethan and I went up to the cabin the following weekend with groceries, fresh sheets, and a new set of porch chairs. We cleaned out the strange energy they had left behind. We opened windows, let the mountain air in, and sat by the lake until the sky turned gold. At one point, Ethan looked over at me and said, "You seem different." I smiled and asked if he meant exhausted. He laughed softly. "No. Free." I looked across the water and realized he was right. For years, I had confused love with endless endurance. I thought being a good daughter meant being the last wall standing, the quiet fixer, the one who absorbed every blow so nobody else had to feel discomfort. But that was never love. Love does not require you to disappear so other people can stay comfortable. Love does not hide decisions from you, spend your loyalty like currency, and then call you cruel when you finally say no. If there is one thing this whole mess taught me, it is that boundaries are not punishment. They are proof that your kindness has value. They protect what is good in you from people who only notice it when it benefits them. They also force others to face the consequences they were planning to hand to you. That lesson is uncomfortable, but it is necessary. Too many people are raised to believe that being useful is the same as being loved, especially inside families where one child is expected to carry more and complain less. But real love has gratitude in it. It has honesty. It has respect. And when those things are missing, protecting yourself is not selfish. It is healthy. It is responsible. It may even be the only way to stop a cycle of entitlement before it spreads any further. I still do not know whether I will ever have a real relationship with my parents again. Maybe one day there will be an honest apology, real accountability, and enough time to build something different. Maybe there will not. What I do know is this: I am no longer willing to trade my peace for the illusion of family harmony. I gave enough. More than enough. And the most valuable thing I got back was not the cabin, or the silence after the police cars left, or the moment their smiles disappeared. It was the knowledge that I can choose myself without becoming a bad person. In fact, sometimes choosing yourself is the most honest and life-giving choice you can make.